Hello everyone and welcome back to Video Editing 1 with Professor Harris. Today we're going through MC110 Lesson 9, Creative Retiming Effects. This lesson revisits motion effects. Those are the effects that let you speed up or slow down a clip to fix issues like poor timing. And it reviews generating a freeze frame clip from a moving video. After the quick review, you'll explore how to create variable speed effects. This lets you create high quality speed ramping effects that you often see in car commercials and in big blockbuster action sequences or scenes. Let's look at the goals for this lesson. Today, the goals are to review the types of motion effects, to perform a fit to fill edit, use the time warp preset, create a custom time warp, and understand trim to fill. All right, let's get into it. As promised, we'll start by reviewing the motion effects and freeze frames. The MC101 course introduced you to 3 types of motion effects and how they vary a clip's speed. Then you worked with 2 of them. Those were freeze frames and motion effects. So let's start our review by with a matching activity. Let's see if you can match back up the different functions here. And I'll give you a second and then I'll go through them. Okay, let's get into it. Number 1, we have freeze frames. Where does this go? That's right, it goes to C, displaying a single frame from a clip or subclip for a duration that you choose. Then we have number 2, motion effects. This obviously goes to A, speeds up or slows down video at a consistent speed. And then number 3, we have time warp, so that's obviously B, uses keyframes to vary a timeline segment's speed over time. How did you do? I hope you guys did all right with that. If you matched all 3 correctly, that's great. If not, again, we will continue to review them going forward. A couple of notes here before we continue, though. You'll create traditional freeze frame clips or consistent speed motion effects by loading a clip or subclip into the source monitor. Remember how we load it in the source monitor and then we click this little motion effect editor button? This is a button that we mapped on our keyboard. If you don't have this mapped, you can hit Command 3 on your keyboard or on your computer, or Control 3, and then you can come into your command palette here and we can map that motion effect button. I believe that's under FX and it's the first one. You'll make sure you map it here. If you try and do it from this button here in the timeline, it's not going to have the same function, so you have to do it from the source monitor. It has to be in the source monitor's toolbar. Okay. All right, to generate a freeze frame, we can go to Composer, then Freeze Frame to ensure that we have the correct render type. So we can go Composer, and then here in Freeze Frame, we're going to make sure we're set to use, we're going to make sure we're set to using both fields. This is for progressive footage, which is unfortunately not, which is strangely enough, not the default setting. It's by default set to using interpolated field, and this would be for that 1080i footage or anything that has that interpolated field footage, or interlaced footage, I should say. But using both fields is for progressive footage. So we have 24p, 25p, and so on. So we're going to make sure we're always using that both fields. And then to generate a freeze frame, all we have to do is load our clip into the source monitor that we want to use, pick a specific frame by scrubbing through. Then we just right click, we can do freeze frame, and then we can pick a custom duration that we have here. So I'm going to do a 15-second freeze frame. It's going to ask to save it to my drive. I'll save it to my Macintosh HD internal drive. If I was working off a flash drive, I would select that there and then click OK. We can see it creates this new freeze frame, this new walking freeze frame with the FF name convention at the end. I can load this into my source monitor and we have 15 seconds of a freeze frame. Super easy. Additionally, we could do this with a subclip if we had subclips that we wanted to use. And then again, we could be changing, really, we could go between the interlaced or interpolated footage. So we have different options there. Awesome. So Media Composer again adds that new FF extension at the end, and we have it saved in the same bin that we created in. What if we want to create a freeze frame from a specific frame in a timeline segment? How will we load that into the source monitor? Here's a hint. We can look at my screen here. If let's say I should probably load a clip into the sequence. Let's load a sequence here. Oh, that's empty. Here we go. There's some sequences. Remember we were working with this? I think we did this. Yeah, this is a whatchamacallit. We can do the match frame. Do you guys remember the match frame button? So I could hover over a shot in my timeline. Let's say I wanted to make a freeze frame from this specific shot. I could go, oh, how do I get that in my source monitor? All I have to do is click the match frame, and boom, it's going to instantly match the frame here in my source monitor. So now I can create a freeze frame just off this. So that's a super fast way that we could do that as well. If you guessed the match frame, that's great. If not, that's okay. We can continue. We're going to continue to revisit functions. Just a reminder, you got to park the timeline's position indicator on the frame that you'll freeze, and then you press the match frame button in the record monitor, or a key if you mapped it to your keyboard. Media Composer locates the original source clip or subclip and then loads that into the source monitor for us to generate that freeze frame. All right, let's review creating motion effects now. Like freeze frame, Media Composer creates a new clip when you create a traditional motion effect. This time, the motion effect clip plays at the speed that we choose. So to create a constant speed motion effect, we can load a clip or subclip into the source monitor, or we can use the match frame to load a timeline segment into our source monitor. I think I'm going to go to my Tennessee parkour footage, and what is this? This is a slow motion. This is cool. We'll get a slow motion of this guy flipping. So I'm going to set in here, and I'll leave the out when he lands there. So setting out there. Cool. Now we have it loaded in the monitor, we can set our in and out marks, check. We can click the motion effect button that we mapped, or we could open the command palette and click it there with the active palette. I'm going to select mine here. Then in the motion effects dialog box, we can fill in the variable speed option. For example, we could set it to 200% and the speed field to double this clip speed. It's set to 50 right now. Let's set it to 25% speed so we have a nice slow motion effect. And then we can select the render method for both fields or progressive. Let's select both fields because this is progressive footage. And if we were working with interpolated or interlaced, we could choose the other options. And then we'll click the create and then select the destination bin. So I'll hit create here. It's going to ask me which bin I'd like to store it in. I'm going to put it in my Tennessee parkour because that's where the original clip was as well. When I hit create, it's going to create that new clip. We can see the icon for this has been created. If we drag out the name, we can see we've got it tells us not only it's a motion effect, but it also tells us it's got 6 FPS. It's working at 6 FPS. So now if I play this in my source monitor, we can see it's playing significantly slower than it was before. We are going to watch this whole clip all the way through. Maybe 25% speed was too slow. It did I think it did say that this was already slow fountain. No, that's fine. Ta-da, easy peasy. So now this is a manipulatable, essentially clip. We could set our in and out marks, and we could add this somewhere in our timeline where we see fit or where we'd want it. Cool. What if we want to replace a shot or gap in our sequence, and the clip's content that we want to use is too short or longer than the marked timeline section? We can use the fit to fill edit function to solve this. So let's say, oh no, we have a hole in our timeline. We need a shot here. I could say, oh well, let's put a longer shot in here. So let's say we wanted to fill it with all of this for some reason. We could set our in and our out, and we could use the fit to fill function in Media Composer. The fit to fill edit function does the same thing, only with fewer steps. So we can use it anytime we want to fit a clip into a specific area of content, into a marked section of our timeline. So Media Composer calculates the speed for us. The fit to fill also deviates from the 3-point editing convention you've used throughout this course. Why? Because it requires 4 marks to work. We have to have an in and out in a timeline, and we have to have an in and out in our source monitor. Because we're saying we need to fill this content here in our timeline. We want to use this content in our source monitor to fill that timeline content. So with the clip or subclip loaded in our source monitor, we can set our in and out marks like we said before. We can set our in and out marks to specify the location in our timeline as well. I'm going to hold Command to snap to this position. I'll set in, and I'm going to hold Command again, snap to that position. I'll set an out. So now I have a specific region in my timeline marked, my correct track selectors selected, and then we can press the fit to fill button in the source monitor, or the key that we mapped during the lesson 3 command palette in the edit tab. All right, Here's a quick note. Media Composer in the book says that you would select the Fit to Fill button in our source monitor. There is no Fit to Fill button, but there is the Motion Effects Editor button. We can click that, and then we can select Fit to Fill here. Also making sure that we're set to both fields. And then we can click Create, and then we can choose the bin that this is going to go into. Again, we're going to leave it in Tennessee Parkour, and we'll hit OK. And now we have that clip generated specifically for that region. So we can load this clip. It will automatically load into our source monitor. And then what we can do is drag it from our source monitor and hold Command, and we can snap it right to this area. And now we can see that it's a motion effect and that it's been added, and it fits perfectly in this area that we've designated for it. So I'm going to hit play and we'll watch it through. Boom. So now we have that empty timeline filled. Let's say we had a really short clip that we wanted to fill a long duration. We could do the exact same steps, and Media Composer is going to automatically calculate that distance. So for instance, let's use this shot, this gap here. Let's load a different shot in our timeline. Why do I always click that one? I'm like, my brain is hard set to keep clicking that one. So for instance, let's use this shot here. So I'll set an in here, and I'm going to set out here for some reason. I'm going to use a very short portion of this clip. What we can do is we can do all the exact same things we did earlier. We could set our in and out marks in our source monitor. We can set our in and out marks in our timeline. Let me set my, oh, shoot, I messed up my, here, let's fix this. In here. And then in my timeline, I'm going to hold Command to snap to there. I'll set an in. Same thing. Set out. So now my in and out. I'm going to come up to my source monitor again. Select my motion effects. We'll leave Fit to Fill selected. And then we're going to use both fields, and we'll hit Create. And then we'll set the destination bin. Click OK. We have our clip loaded in the source monitor. All I have to do, hold Command, drag it to, and it's going to drop it right into this area. So now if I hit play, this is going to be in slow motion now. It has slowed down this clip to fill this distance. Yeah, all right, sweet. All right, I hope all that makes sense to you. Makes a lot of sense to me, and it's pretty straightforward. So let's wrap up our freeze frame and traditional motion effect review with the exercise in the book. I would encourage you to go do that exercise. That's 9.1 in the lesson 9 exercise area. All right, let's continue on to working with the time warp effects. So during the last exercise, you used the match frame to create and edit a motion effect clip into a montage. By the end of this topic, you'll also know how to use the time warp effects to adjust speed directly in the timeline. As mentioned, time warp effects differ from traditional motion effects. You'll always apply them to timeline segments, and you can keyframe them to vary segment speed. That's not all. Here are some additional differences and notes to keep in mind. I'm going to say that again because it's super important. Time warp effects apply to timeline segments. It's not something you generate in the source monitor like I just did for these two other examples. Motion effects and freeze frames are generated in our source monitor. Time warp effects are applied to segments in our timeline. Avid wants you to know the difference there. All right, here are some more additional differences and notes to keep in mind. When you keyframe a time warp effect, Media Composer ramps a clip's speed around them, just like other keyframes. Time warp effects don't change a segment's duration. Instead, Media Composer adds available frames during an overall speed increase and removes frames during an overall decrease in speed. That's a good thing to note too. And then time warp effects include additional higher quality render types. These methods blend field data and further smooth the motion. So they're going to be smoother than other effects. Since time warp effects are segment effects, you can apply them the same way you do other segment effects like the resize and mask effects. It's like we'll come up to our effects palette, we'll find it, and we'll drag and drop it to our timeline like we do a lot of other effects when we're working. Oh, that's really cool. That worked out nice. I like that. Anyway, what was I saying? Cool. And you can find them in the effects palette time warp category. So if we come up here to our effects palette, we go to our time warp category. I'm blind. Here it is, time warp. We can find our time warp effect. Nice. All right. So this category contains mostly presets. For example, we have the reverse motion and the speed bump. To build a variable speed effect from scratch, we'll use the time warp and we'll add that to a timeline segment. To get a feel for how time warp effects work, we'll apply various presets though. So adding a time warp preset to a segment. So we're going to start with that. To add a time warp preset effect, we're going to open the effect palette by clicking the vertical title bar, check, and then we're going to drag the preset from the time warp category timeline to a segment in our timeline, and then we'll play back the results. So we can let's grab the reverse motion effect. So we'll just, first we'll look at what the clip looks like. We'll use this one, for example. He jumps to a wall and he keeps running. All right, let's add this reverse motion effect to this in the timeline. Now, if we watch it, he's going to jump backwards. So all this does is it reverses the motion of this shot. So now if I play it forwards, the shot is in reverse. Super, super easy. That looks super weird. I'm going to play that now. The momentum he gets, that looks so weird. Let's do it again. That's weird. Okay. All right, so that's a quick reverse motion effect. That's super easy. So some presets generate stylistic variable speed effects, while others can serve as time-saving creative effects. Here's a quick rundown of presets. So 0% to 100% and 100% to 0% ramps the speed from a freeze frame to a clip's native speed, or from a clip's native speed to a freeze frame. So if you set one of those effects from 0 to 100, you would start with a still, and then you would move into a motion clip at 100% normal speed. Freeze frame, by default, uses the segment's first frame to freeze the entire segment. So if we use freeze frame, it's going to freeze the first frame of an entire segment. Cool. Next we have reverse motion. Reverses the segment's motion by 100%. For example, a scenic shot that zooms in will zoom out once reversed. Same thing we just saw here. This effect is just playing in the exact same speed and duration, just in reverse. And then we have speed boost, ramps from negative 50% approximately to roughly 200% at a segment's midpoint, and then back down to, not negative 50, just ramps back down to 50. So it starts at 50, ramps up to 200, and then goes back down to 50. Let's do that. Let's add the speed boost effect to this in our timeline, and it's going to replace that reverse motion effect that we had on the shot. Now if I play it, so we saw it went from 50%, 200, and then back down to 50. And then we have trim to fill. This trims speed rather than content when performing a ripple or dual roller trim. You'll explore this later in this lesson, so we don't have to worry about that one yet. But there's a bunch of those quick time warp effects. They're really fun, and you can use them for a lot of things. As you try various presets, you'll quickly find Media Composer applies them to the entire timeline segment. For example, the 0 to 100% preset ramps from pause to full speed over the course of an entire shot. What if you want to hold the first frame longer or reach 100% sooner? You can. You'll use the motion effect editor for this, and making presets a quick start for creating variable speed effects. So that said, the best way to learn how to build a time warp effect is from scratch. So you should be getting familiar with it that way. So using the time warp effect. Time warp is a natural effect. That means you'll see no speed change when you apply it. To customize it, you'll make the adjustments in the motion effects editor. So we're going to drag the time warp effect from our effect palette to a timeline segment. Let's choose a segment first in our timeline here. This looks like a cool shot. Yeah, let's use this one. I'm going to clear my marks in my timeline by hitting G because I still have my in and out mark set. So we're going to drag our time warp effect to this in our timeline. And now if we play this clip forward and backward, we're not going to notice anything because again we have to use the motion effect editor button in our timeline to edit the time warp so it actually does something. So we'll go ahead and select our motion effect editor button here, and that'll open this little window. Now we can adjust the settings on this time warp. All right. So initially the motion effect editor displays a few controls, such as menus for changing the render type or correcting source and output formats. To customize the time warp effect, you'll use the two pop-up graphs. This is speed and position. In this course, you'll work with the speed graph and monitor the position graph. So if you were going to take one of the more advanced courses with Avid, we would use the other settings, but we're just going to stick to those two for now. All right, to open and close the speed graph, we can click the running man icon. If we click this, boom, now we can see our speed graph. That's super easy. Once you open the speed graph, you can use the motion effect editor for navigation and to keyframe speed changes. The image above, or what you see on my screen here, shows an example of an animated time warp. Tell you what, I'm going to show you the image from the book. So here we have that image of a generated time warp effect. And this is the same thing. It's just a little darker on this version. But yeah, these are all the same things. So now I'm going to go through a list here, and it's going to call out the following motion effect editor and speed graph features. So number 1 is the speed graph button. This is open. That's what it looks like when it's open. And it opens or closes the speed graph when clicked. Number 2 is the position graph button. It is closed currently in this picture. It opens and closes the position graph when clicked. Number 3 is the edit graph menu. This shows the active graph speed by default and lets you switch graphs. Number 4 is the percent speed axis. This displays a range of speeds from -100 up to 300% by default. Negative values represent reverse motion. Keep that in mind as we move forward with more effects. When you hit negative, you do like -100, that's going to play back in perfect reverse speed, not perfect negative speed. All right, number 5, we have the value scale bar. This lets you zoom in or out of the speed axis. If we drag it to the left to reveal additional speed rates and to the right to show fewer rates. Number 6, we have the output position axis. This represents the time code for a timeline segment containing a time warp effect. Number 7, we have the position scale bar. This lets you zoom in or out of the position's axis. And we would drag that left to reveal the segment's boundaries and right to zoom in. Number 8, we have the animation curve. This indicates the speed changes created with the time warp effect. We'll drag the position indicator to see the speed at any point along the curve. Number 9, we have the active keyframe. This lets you speed the adjustment at the moment in time. Number 10, we have the percent speed. This shows an active keyframe's speed value. And number 11, we have output positions. This shows an active keyframe's timecode value. So lots to unpack there. But Avid wants you to know one more thing. While you can view both speed and position graphs simultaneously, you can only use one to control the effect. The edit graph menu shows the active graph. If you change it, the time warp effect will reset to its default settings. So keep that in mind. Okay, now that you can find your way around the motion effect editor and the speed graph, let's look at creating a variable speed effect. And that starts with keyframing a time warp effect. All time warp effects include a keyframe at the beginning of the effect with some presets like 0% to 100%. Multiple keyframes appear in the speed graph. So you can add and modify those starting keyframes. To customize the time warp effect with keyframes, with the speed graph open, we have ours open now because we've clicked our little running man. We've got our speed graph open. We can drag the keyframe up to increase or down to decrease in the graph and monitor the green value that appears. We can also type a value in the percentage field. For example, we could do 50% to start a time warp at half speed. Let's just drag this up for now. We'll go up to 200. 200. Yeah, that's fine. We'll just leave it at 200. And now we can move the position indicator forward and click the pink add keyframe button under the speed graph or apostrophe key. So we could drag this forward now, or we could come forward, down here, and then I could add another keyframe, and then I could move this position down. So now we see we're starting to create something. We started off with 200% speed, maybe want to dip down to 50, maybe want to scrub through the time a little bit more. Let's try and make something for real though. This guy's going to jump off the wall. Let's make him jump off the wall. We'll start with slow. We'll go slow motion here. We'll go 25%. No, we should go 50. We'll go 50% speed at the beginning, and then he's going to jump off the wall. Let's move this. No, let's delete that. If we want to remove a keyframe, we can delete it. So he's going to jump off 50% speed. He's going to land it. As soon as he lands it, I'm going to ramp the speed back up. So I'm going to add a keyframe, and then I'm going to keep moving along. And then for this guy's jump, we're going to increase it to like 200 until he lands. So add another keyframe, and now we can increase this. We'll take that up. We'll go 150, roughly 150. All right. So now, if we run this through, we can see if I hit 6 on my keyboard, it should do, yeah. So we saw a rough version of what that's going to look like. Now we're off the clip, so it's not showing us. There we go. We're back on the clip, so now it's showing us our little edit here. But we can see we did all kinds of stuff. We moved the position indicator forward, and then we clicked the Add Keyframe button, and then we moved the graph up and down. We made adjustments, and we could make custom adjustments by entering specific values if we wanted. But I like to use the drag function. I like to drag it up and down manually. It just feels more custom for me that way. Yeah. Okay. As you add and adjust time warp keyframes, keep the following in mind. If we hold Alt or Option, the Alt or Option key to change a keyframe speed value and position in the timeline. So we could hold Alt or Options, and I could even move this left or right. And now I've got free range of motion, whereas before it's just kind of like it's an up-down thing, and it won't let me go left and right. But if I hold that Option key, I get all kinds of options for making this get all weird. Additionally, if we hold Control or Alt or Option plus Command, it isolates a keyframe's movement and moves it earlier or later in time. So if I wanted to maintain, let's say, a speed of 26.15, I could hold Command and Option, and then when I drag this left and right, no, I gotta hold it first, and then drag it left and, oh, what's going on? It's supposed to constrain it. Option plus Command. No, it's not working. Maybe I have to click it and then hold. Nope. That's weird. It doesn't seem to work. It's supposed to isolate the keyframes, move it to only left and right, so currently earlier or later in time. And then if we, to delete a keyframe, we can click it and then press backspace or delete on Mac. So I can just delete this keyframe, and now we have one at the beginning and one at the end, so we have a nice slow ramp up. Cool. One more tip, as mentioned, adjusting time warp speed adds and removes keyframes from the segment. As you increase speed, Media Composer adds additional frames to a shot. If you reach the last frame available for that content, that frame is repeated. So creating freeze frame it'll create a freeze frame until the end. So if we do some kind of radical change, we reach the end and we're still somehow going, it's going to create a bunch of freeze frames to stack up to fill the end of that shot. To avoid a freeze frame kind of situation like that, we can open the position graph and adjust the value scale and the position scale bars to reveal the entire graph region, which will be gray surrounds the graph. While increasing the keyframes value in the speed graph, we can ensure that the position graph line doesn't cross the top of the graph's boundary. Okay, so what did I just say? Essentially, if you cross the top, you're going to get into that freeze frame stuff. We don't want that to happen. So you're going to want to make sure you're staying beneath that. I put that clear out of reach now. Come on. We don't want our keyframes to, let me undo that. There we go. We don't want this line to hit the ceiling before it hits the right side. The right side, the blue, is essentially the end of our shot. So the far right, it should never be exceeding the ceiling first. So right now I've got mine set up. It's just the location of my keyframe. I can delete that. I could drag this to the end and then add a keyframe there. But what essentially Media Composer is saying is you don't want to hit the ceiling before you hit the right wall. You got to hit that right wall first. That's very important for creating a motion or a time warp effect that's nice and consistent. Let me add another keyframe here just for fun, so we actually have something to look at. Cool. And then we can move this keyframe up or down, but we don't want it to exceed, again, that ceiling. We want it to stay. We want it to hit the wall first. So we could play this through real quick. Oh, nope. That's not what I meant to do. Yeah. So we're getting there. We're getting there. We're slowly getting to what we're looking for with this shot. Okay. Yeah, that's a super important point. Just paying attention to the graph's boundaries. You don't want it to hit the ceiling before you hit the right wall. Okay. Now, if the line crosses the position graph's top, decrease the speed until it crosses the right edge. Again, we want it to cross the right before it crosses top. As you play back a variable speed effect, you may notice a natural ease out and ease in speed ramp. around the keyframes. That's because the time warp's default interpolation type is spline. So remember when we used spline earlier, we used that for that nice ease in and ease out on that zoom effect that we used in the pan and zoom in lesson 8. We have the same option here in the time warp effect by default. It's automatically going to do this nice ease in and then a nice ease out. Otherwise, this would just be one straight line and we would have a constant motion effect, which is just a regular motion effect, right? We don't want that. All right, if we wanted to change time warp keyframe interpolation, you can change the keyframe interpolation to create stylized speed effects. Media Composer includes 4 types. So to change the time warp's effects interpolation, we can click the Motion Effect Editor's Fast menu, and that's this guy right here. This little fast menu brings that up, and then we can switch between shelf, linear, spline, and Bezier. I don't know how you pronounce it. And when you switch the interpolation method, Media Composer updates the speed graph to reflect that change. So let's take a quick look at each one of these and how they work differently. So first we have shelf. Let me change it to shelf. So shelf, essentially, we're going to run, let me add a keyframe here in the middle so we get a little bit of an idea of what this looks like. Womp. Shelf just runs the clip at whatever you tell it to, and then boom, makes an adjustment very quickly, and then continues going at that new adjustment. So we're playing at 50% speed, and then all of a sudden we're going to jump to 275.61% speed, and it's going to keep that until the end of the segment. So that's shelf. So if we wanted just a dramatic jump in our speed out of nowhere, that's the way we would do it. Then we have linear. Let me change it to linear. I can also right-click on this, and I can just change it that way. Linear is just consistent as a constant rate of speed. So we're going to have a constant effect. Let me hold Option. And now I can move this around. I'm going to delete this other keyframe because I don't need that. Now we have linear set up here. And linear is just, again, it's going to use that, it's going to stay on a constant. So anywhere I set this, it's essentially a motion effect now. So I could have it, it's going to rise at a constant rate of speed, and then we could have it kind of stop abruptly and then maintain that whatever we're looking for. So this is linear. So it's kind of, you should be thinking about it going in straight lines to every single point. Yeah. All right. Next we have spleen or spline, however you pronounce it. Spline, we can see it does that natural ease in, it goes up, and then it eases out, nice and easy. So it's got a very nice curve to it. It looks very nice when you play the video too. It seems very natural. So we have that. And then last is Bezier. I don't know how to pronounce this. This is a little bit stranger, a little more customizable as well. What we can do is we can select on specific keyframes, and then we get this extra handle. And we can use this handle to adjust that kind of spline or that kind of ease in and out. So we can make it more abrupt. We can make it sharper. So we could do something along these lines. Let's make something really weird now and see what it looks like. So I could do something like this where it ramps up and then it kind of maintains, but then it slowly ramps back too. So let's see what this looks like. That's the source monitor. Anyway, didn't really look like much, but it was there. It did a thing. So we're doing a thing. I should probably read the specific explanations that Media Composer gives for this. So, but I'm just gonna leave it at that because I think that this explaining it in layman's terms is gonna help you understand it a little bit better. Again, you get these little handles. What are these called again? What's it called? I saw it. It said it earlier. I don't know. It just gives you handles. That's at least what I call them. All right. Oh no, it does call them. It calls them curve handles. Okay, cool. So, quick note here about the Bezier interpolation method provides flexible manipulation that's beyond the scope of this course. So, to learn more about that, we could go to Advanced Keyframing Interpolation Option topic in the Media Composer Help. So, if you want to learn more about this tool specifically and using these, you can. All right, once you create time warp effects, you'll want them to play back smoothly once you're done with, and you give the output command. To do this, you want to choose the appropriate render option from the type menu. So we have our different menus. We're going to make sure we're set to both fields because this is progressive footage. And then Next, we have the choosing a render type in the book here. The type menu contains the same render methods that we've used to create traditional motion effects, plus several more. So let's take an in-depth look at these really quickly. All right, so first, when you change the render type, Media Composer changes the motion effect icon displayed on the timeline segment. I'm going to pull up a table now to show you what all those look like. Okay, so here's that graph, and I also took a second screenshot to show you the definitions that Media Composer gives and for the different interpolation methods there. So take a moment to read that as well. But we have the following table identifies the time warp effect icons. So when we select these different kind of render types, I love how it all just went away. Let me pull it back up. When we select those different types here in that type drop down, it's going to change to these different icons. So we have duplicated field, both fields, interpolated field, VTR style, blended interpolated, blended VTR, fluid motion draft, and fluid motion. And these are the icons for that. All right. While adding and customizing time warp effects, you can leave type at the default of both fields option. So I would highly recommend leaving it default. If you're working with interlaced footage such as 1080i, you'll want to change any keyframe time warp effects to blended, interpolated, or blended VTR. Quick note here from Avid, if you choose fluid motion draft or fluid motion from the type menu, the green real-time effect indicator turns blue and you'll need to render the time warp to see the results. These options work best on high-resolution film projects and can cause movement to look odd in lower resolution footage. So keep that in mind. With that, you have what you need to build a high-quality variable speed effect with the time warp tool or the time warp effect. So let's look at two more helpful features. So that's understanding anchor frames and trim to fill. To wrap up this lesson, not to time warp this lesson, you'll explore one more time warp feature, the source anchor frame, and revisit presets, specifically the trim to fill. So, changing the source anchor frame. How do we go about that? So, quick review. When you apply freeze frame presets, Media Composer uses the segment's first frame as the freeze frame. And if you add the time warp effect and drag the default keyframe to 0, the first frame once again becomes the freeze frame. So, what did I just say? Let me close this. Here in my time warp effects category, if I choose freeze frame and I throw it on one of these clips, it's going to by default use the first frame of this shot to represent the freeze frame for the whole segment. So that's what that would look like. That's what it's saying right now. And if we add a time warp effect and drag the default keyframe to 0, that's also going to do the same thing. It's going to use that first frame. In fact, if you drag that keyframe up or down, you'll notice the first frame stays the same while the last frame changes. The segment ends at later content if you increase speed, and it ends at earlier content if you decrease speed. The source anchor frame controls this. So what am I even saying? What is going on here? So if we use a freeze frame, we throw it here on this clip. Again, by default, it's going to use that first freeze frame. Let's open the motion effect editor. Okay, now that we got our motion effect editor open, we're going to make sure that we have the speed graph open as well. And to start, the first thing we're going to do to change our new source anchor frame is we're going to change the freeze frame source by changing the default keyframe to a value other than 0. So we need to move this up a little bit to something other than 0. And now when we scrub through, we can see that this shot has motion. I picked a really bad clip. This is a very stagnant clip. I picked a bad one for adding a keyframe to. Let's abandon this. Let's get a new one. Let's pick a new shot that has a little bit more dynamic footage to it. Even better. All right, we'll use this. We'll drop it here. We'll open our motion effect editor. Boom, we're in here. Boom. Now, first thing we're going to do is we're going to change this to anything other than 0 so that we can scrub through the rest of this and pick a new freeze frame. Tell you what, maybe we go 100%. Okay, now we can see more of this shot. Let me undo that distance though, because I just want to come up maybe a little bit closer. Okay, so now we can slide through. We can park the position indicator on a frame that we'll use as a new freeze frame or a frame that we want to sync to an audio cue. So I think, for instance, this one of these first sprinting, this is a really good freeze frame to me. I'm going to add a keyframe now. I could click add keyframe, or I could hit the apostrophe key on my keyboard. We've added a new keyframe. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to click the set source anchor frame button. That is this right here. So all we have to do now is click this. Now that we click this button, it has set this to the new source anchor frame. Now we're going to delete the original keyframe and change the new keyframe speed to 0, or build the time warp effect around the anchor keyframe's audio cue. So I'm going to select this other one. We're going to delete it. It's gone now. And now we're going to set this one's speed back down to 0. When we set it back down to 0, now we have a new constant freeze frame. This is the new anchor frame. This is our new freeze frame for this shot now. We've adjusted it from the first frame. You can only use one source anchor frame per time warp effect, and changing it works best if you do this before adding more keyframes. This is a weird way to do this, but this is the way that you would do it. If you already added a freeze frame to this shot, you didn't want it to be the first frame of the shot, then this is the way you would do it. It's strange. I don't know why it's. I don't exactly know why it's this way. All I know that it is, and this works. All right, let's move on to using the trim to fill preset. What if you want to lengthen a shot, but it doesn't have enough handle? Or what if you cut the exact content that you need into your sequence, but it doesn't quite fit with the music's timing or underlying narration? The trim to fill effect in the time warp category. Let me close my little window here. The trim to fill time warp effect in this category can help you solve both of those challenges. So once applied, you can trim the clip speed rather than the content as you shorten or lengthen the segment. What does that mean? We can trim the clip speed rather than content as we shorten or lengthen the segment. This will make sense in a second. So we can use the trim to fill. We'll drag the trim to fill effect onto a timeline segment that we'd like to adjust. We'll use this one just because it's here. This guy looks like a bird. Fly away, fly away. All right, trim to fill, and we'll add that there. And then we're going to enter the trim mode and trim the clip to the desired length. So now we're going to enter trim mode by hitting U on our keyboard. And we're going to trim this clip to the desired length that we're looking for. Let's do a ripple trim, and I'm gonna pull it in pretty tight. So now we have a pretty short clip now with our trim to fill. I want to see him fly again. There we go. Fly. Okay, as you can see now in my shot and on my screen, trimming the segment with the trim to fill effect applied trims speed rather than content. In this case, the trim that I did, my ripple trim, I could have used it to lengthen. So let's try this. Let's extend it. I can use it to lengthen this shot now, and it's going to make auto adjustments right inside Media Composer. So I can keep making this longer and longer and longer and keep making a custom sized length. So it lengthened the A-sided clip using it to slow down. So now it's slowed down this. So no matter how much I trim in or out with this ripple trim, it's always going to fit the same clip into the exact same region and end at the exact same point. So he dives over this tree. I'm going to lengthen it out more. And he's still, by the end of this clip, he's going to be diving over this tree. It's just going to be making those auto adjustments in the timeline. And we can even see here, it's telling us the percentage. It's slowed down to 33% speed. So if I hit play on this now, breaks his neck. So now, yeah, we can make this shorter. This is a super cool feature that I always forget about for some reason. So yeah, we have options with that. All right, fixed versus elastic keyframe types. This is a quick note from Avid. Most Media Composer effects use elastic keyframes. This means the start and end keyframes become closer together or contract or further apart, stretched as you trim. In the case of the trim to fill effect, this drives the speed change. So the rest of the time warp category uses fixed keyframes, meaning the keyframes remain in place, which are fixed as you trim. That way you add or remove content as you trim and speed remains unchanged. You can change the keyframe type for most effects. For time warp effects, you click the Motion Effects Editor Fast menu and then switch either fixed keyframes or elastic keyframes. To learn more about fixed and elastic keyframe types, you can check out the Controlling Advanced Keyframing Behavior with Trimmed Effects topic on the Media Composer help. All right, we've absorbed a lot of information in working with these time warp effects. It's time to put those concepts to work and get into the exercise 9.2. Please do that on your own time. But this also takes us to the end of this lesson. So we've learned a lot about these time warp effects and all the different features that you can use them for. Some of them do a lot, some of them do a little, but all of them have a special place in our hearts. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. To my students, I will see you back in class. And to those of you on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.